Right, afternoon everyone. I'm on strict instructions to start exactly on time. So yeah, come in, sit down. Welcome, thanks for agreeing to spend the time with me this afternoon. I've got about half an hour's worth of material, depending on how we go, and then questions after it, right? So my name's Tom Fairbairn. I'm a distinguished engineer at a company called Solace. We make an event streaming platform, kind of event broker at the core with a kind of portal system on top, which is kind of where I'm going to go today with this presentation. Okay, quick show of hands. We're at an API conference, right? Usually that's kind of REST synchronous APIs. So if I talk about event-driven asynchronous APIs, show of hands, how many people aware event-driven, that kind of thing? Okay, great stuff. Take a quick look around. Keep your hands up. Take a quick look around. Right, so conversation about a year ago, there's probably what, 90% of you have put your hands up, right? About a year ago, it would have been about 50% of you. A year before that would have been about 10% of you. All right, so I think that shows that this whole event-driven thing is really gaining a lot of popularity now, right? So what I wanted to share, I've been doing this for kind of 10 years. So I just wanted to share some of the lessons I've learned over that time. And they're going to feed into a particular thread about this, which is about how we kind of mature this market, build the kind of tooling we need to make this a bit less of a kind of hacker playground and a bit more of a kind of industrialized commercial offering that we can really use, you know, across all use cases rather than the, you know, kind of super hard hacky stuff. Okay, all right, so I'll cover those lessons, 5 of them. They kind of feed into the next section, which is talking about this idea of event APIs, right? How can we present these events that we've got that maybe are useful to, say, even external parties? How can we kind of package them up as something that can be consumed, a bit like you might do with a standard REST API product, right? So actually, that's a good point, right? Who's is aware of this idea of API products? Okay, that's not as many as I thought. Okay, all right, well, that's all right. We can cover kind of where we're going with that. All right, and then, you know, I'm from Solace. We have our own product and our own way of doing this, which is this thing we call PubSub Plus Event Portal, and then I'll show you kind of how we build this up in there. Okay, all right. Let's get started then. Okay, so first lesson. Have any of you actually built an event-driven architecture? 1, 2. Oh, quite a lot of you. Wow. Okay. This statement there, it's not easy. I don't think. And I've been doing it for 10 years. What do you guys think? Easy? Hard? No, I'm not. I was expecting a lot of you. Like, it's actually pretty difficult. For people who are used to REST APIs, it's very much a different thinking process, right? Instead of somebody calling you and you returning some data, it's, I have some data, I'm going to send that out, and whoever's really, you know, wanting to receive that data, they're going to subscribe to it and get that, right? And it's going to happen as it happens. There's not like a schedule on which you call, you're not polling or anything like that. And that can be quite a big shift of approach to many people. This idea of, like, you know, the producer owns what they're going to send out as an event, that can cause problems for people too, right? Because it's breaking that responsibility between the caller and the producer. So as a producer, how do I know my event has been consumed, first of all? And how do I know it's dealt with properly? Well, one of the things we do in event-driven is break that responsibility. So it's down to the consumer, the subscriber, to do what they should do with an event. But as a producer, that means you've no longer got that view of what the subscribers are actually doing with things, right? So it's a bit of a shift. Now, I've seen a lot of material that kind of says you should do event-driven everywhere. And we in Solace, we don't really believe in that. We believe in a complementary approach. Because event-driven is quite hard, you should think carefully before applying it and doing it where it's needed and not trying to kind of do it everywhere. One of those reasons is, you know, I've talked about this idea of separation of concerns. It's a bit difficult to debug, right? And there's various things we can do to help with that. But actually, when you're zooming back as an architect and taking a system view, it can be quite difficult to understand exactly what's going on. So, especially if you're already using REST APIs, right? Don't try and apply event-driven everywhere. Do it where it's needed. However, once you do get it working, it can be pretty transformational. So an example I've got is from a large consumer goods company, and they have something like 400 factories worldwide. So global concern. Lots of different factories. Some of them are their own factories. Some of them are third-party factories, right? And these are on contracts, so they might manufacture for 6 months and then they won't be used again for another 12 months, right? So from an IT technology point of view, we've got to be able to onboard these factories pretty quickly. Now, the way this company was doing this before this is when you're looking at, say, their ERP or MDM systems, they had like a chunk of code that would look at whatever the job was. It could be a production order or a recipe change or something like that. And it would work through it and it would look, okay, so I'm changing this product. That product is look it up. That product is manufactured in these factories. Okay, I'm going to go through those factories one by one, updating them, right? So that's the kind of spaghetti code one-to-one kind of approach. Well, what's an alternative? Well, we could use a REST API, right? We could have the factories coming in and saying, okay, do I have a recipe change? Do I have a new production order? That's one approach. When you've got 400 factories, that's not going to scale very well, right? You're going to have lots of factories constantly coming in and hitting your API. So they started with this spaghetti code approach, right? And to onboard a new factory, it took them 2 weeks. You had to have a proper project schedule. It took 2 engineers to do it. One of the key things about it was fragile, right? If somebody makes a mistake in that code, you could break every single factory's connection to the data management or ERP system, right? And that's a pretty big deal. People, you're not going to be going for beers that night, right? It's fragile. So what we did there is we had those updates to say a recipe as an event, okay? So if a recipe is updated, we detect that and we send that out as an event. So as our master data management system, we say, here's a recipe change. We don't care which factories it should go to because it's the responsibility of the factories to say, I have these products, so I need to subscribe to any changes to the recipe for those products. Now, one of the really powerful things about this that this particular customer discovered is that actually what you can do is if nobody's listening, if there are no factories that are manufacturing that product, right, it doesn't matter. That's down to the event broker to deal with. So what they're able to do is bring on their MDM and ERP systems to be aware of the fact that there's a new factory coming online in a short period of time. They're able to update all of their databases to deal with that. And then as and when the factory comes online, almost to the minute, that factory then inserts its subscriptions to listen to those events, and away we go. And the effect of that is instead of 2 weeks of coding, testing, right? You've got to do a lot of testing because you can break the whole system, right? This is an overnight service job. Literally, just add a subscription, the factory is up and away. Yeah, question. So this is actually kind of where I'm going next, right? So how does the factory know what the initial recipes are, what their initial production orders are, what's their state? Well, actually, they have a REST API for that. So they go in, they get all the recipes, they get their production orders, they get their state, and then they start listening to the updates. So that's the key point, right? It's complementary, right? You don't necessarily have to completely change everything to be event-driven. The two can exist side by side. So to answer in more detail your question, and I forgot to repeat the question, which was, do you have state in your, in your events? In this particular case, yes. So if you're sending out a change to a production order, because of the way the source system works, they would resend out the entire production order. We in Solace, you see a lot of material around how opinionated you need to be about how you do these things. Honestly, in Solace, we don't take that approach. Our approach is more, what do you want to do? Let's make it work. Just because you've got some notification events doesn't mean you can't have state carried events. It all depends on the use case. Right? Okay. All right. So it's an example of how event-driven can really work. Okay, I'm a vendor in the event-driven space, so it hurts me to say this, right? But event-driven isn't a particularly mature market. Okay, we are missing tooling. We haven't got the whole. If you're used to REST APIs, right, you've got everything from a developer portal where you develop your REST API all the way through a marketplace that you can then give to consumers, and they've got advanced testing tools, things like Postman and all that. We don't really have that in the event-driven space yet, but we're working on it, and that's kind of one of the subjects of the talk today. Okay, more lessons. Yeah. So kind of, again, a point of this presentation here is that in the REST API space, you guys have got a lot of tooling there. You've got design portals. You've got these design portals. You've got these marketplaces, right? And we can learn from that and we can apply them to the event-driven space. Last one, kind of a bit unrelated to the others. I've seen a lot of projects over the years. And one thing I've learned is that kind of big bang adoption is risky and it can often fail. So the way I like to approach things actually is a more migratory approach. So that's kind of building in event-driven approaches in parallel with other things you're doing. So in parallel with REST APIs, right? In parallel with your coded approaches. You don't have to change everything to be all event-driven overnight. You can actually build up your event-driven, your event streams in parallel with your other approaches. And the advantage with that is that it de-risks things quite a lot. It means your migration can go at a slower pace, right? You don't have a big dang cut date that you have to reach. Now, to be able to do this, you kind of need to have a way of mixing the two. So for instance, wouldn't it be really nice if you could generate events off the back of your synchronous REST API calls, as an example, right? If you could do those in parallel, it makes that whole migration approach much easier. Again, if people come along and tell you, you have to do everything event-driven, that kind of makes that approach quite hard, right? Because then you end up with a drop-dead date. Okay, so just an example. This is some publicly available material from a vendor. They're talking about, an order placement service. It needs to validate something against an account service, and they're saying, look, you can do this asynchronously. And like, yeah, it's right. You can do it that way. The question I kind of ask about in this situation is, like, why? This is a classic synchronous interaction, right? I don't want the order to be complete or to be placed until I've validated that whoever's placing the order can actually do that. So why not mix the two? Why not have your order service operate in an event-driven way, but where it needs the synchronous interaction with the account service, why not mix the two, right? It's going to make it a lot easier. You don't have to go through all of this stuff here to make this work in, everything's working in the event-driven fashion, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So this is a classic case of applying event-driven everywhere, even though actually, is there a good reason to? And maybe there is. But explaining it to people as that you should do it absolutely everywhere, I'm not very fond of that approach. One thing you might like to ask is, well, why are you advocating this? Do you have the option? And at Solis, we like to say, yeah, absolutely. Why not generate an event out of your order created? Why not have a synchronous interaction into your account service and still generate that event all at the same time? That way you've got the benefits of both, and you don't have to go through all of this head scratching about how to make inherently synchronous things asynchronous. Okay. Oh yeah, the island in the corner. What I've noticed in going to customers that do this kind of thing is that actually doing this is quite hard. Like, can you imagine debugging this? Like, I've had an order fail. Like, why? Has an account invalidated event been generated, or has it just not been consumed, or what's going on? So these things become kind of fragile in their own way. Like the team that originally builds this gets dispersed as they want to, kind of move that event-driven knowledge around the organization. What that means is you kind of end up with these event-driven islands, right? These islands of projects that have gone event-driven and they don't really talk to each other and people are scared to change them, right? That's not how it's supposed to be, but in many organizations, that's what I've seen actually happen. All right, so don't use EDA for everything. I'm an EDA vendor. Why should I say that? Because, I want people to be successful, basically. Okay, just to hammer home this approach, this complementary approach to your REST APIs and event-driven approach together. This is an example from Roche, big pharmaceutical company. They actually came up with this model, which I really like, which is this kind of north-south versus east-west approach. So for your REST APIs, you're building up layers of composition of functionality, right? So you're starting with basic functionality and building it up as you go up. So we call that north-south, right? You're kind of going up the stack. And that's great when you're constructing functionality, but when you need to talk across systems and across lines of business and across organizations, right, it doesn't really work as well. So they talk about this east-west approach to events, right? So when you need to compose and construct functionality, north-south, lovely. When you need to talk across functionality or across organizations, that's EastWest. That's more of an event-driven approach. And that's where event-driven excels, right? And dealing with being able to having to update lots of different things at the same time. Okay. Let's get into it. Right, so that section is called Introducing Event-Driven. I'm not going to do a big introduction to event-driven, and I'm really glad you all said we know about it, so that's great. Right, quick example, everybody loves an e-commerce website, right? So once again, hammering home the point, if you're going to place an order, that's probably going to be synchronous. You're probably going to wait for an order number to come back, right? So that's probably a REST API, great. All right, but in the back end, you know, we've got to update an inventory system. We probably want to hopefully ship a product, right? That'd be nice. There's probably some updates that we don't want to tell the customer about. Like we probably want to update our CRM system, right? So that's a good example of how we might do event-driven, right? So order created, we're going to go to inventory. Inventory then takes the responsibility for saying, oh yeah, actually I've got that in stock, or no, I don't, right? CRM probably is just going to be a listener, just going to consume, right? We don't really need to tell the order service that the CRM has been updated, right? Okay. So that's fine internally. If we look externally, we might have other people, right? We might have a price comparison website. We might have a shipping provider. Now, shipping provider is quite interesting, you know, your Royal Mail or your UPS or whatever. Shipping provider is quite interesting because not only are they wanting to get from you things like, this is in stock, please come and pick it up, but they're also going to want to send back to you, yeah, I've delivered the order, right? So it's a two-way interaction. Okay, so they're going to probably want to listen to some of these events that are going on too, like inventory notifications that something in stock and so an order's ready to ship. Okay, so let's model this then. How does this look in the event-driven world? So let's look at our order management system. We've got these three events here. We've got a REST API fronting our OMS, and then in the back, then we've got warehouse system, right? We've got stock allocated. Maybe there's new products becoming available. We've got a product catalog, right? And that's probably being updated to the point at which a product's ready to sell. And then we've got marketing. Maybe they want to launch a promotion, you know, get 2 cars for the price of 1, that kind of thing. Okay, the back end then, well, we've got a delivery service provider. That's an external, we're going across businesses here. Now, they're going to need the OMS events, but they're also going to want to know when stock's ready to pick up. So the first thing we notice here is that if we're talking to a delivery service provider, we don't just want events from one system or one domain. We probably want them from a variety of sources, right? A variety of domains. Let's look at our inventory management system, our IMS. Well, that's going to want to know about stock allocated events from the warehouse. So our stock allocated event is being used in multiple locations, both internally and externally, right? Because the IMS is internal. And the same for our price comparison tool. So note here, if we start messing around with our stock allocated events, just like we would if we were messing around with the stock allocated REST API, it has multiple effects downstream. Right? So we need to be careful about this. We need to manage this properly. So we could expose these events individually, but why don't we bundle them up into a single entity, right? An API product. That way, we can manage it as a single entity. We can assign things like product managers. We can annotate metadata to that event. So when should you use it? What should it be used for? What are the individual components? What's the versioning around it? That kind of thing. So we've got our order status API. That's probably going to be used by a delivery service provider. Our inventory product here, that's probably going to go to the IMS. And then we could create a product pricing API, and a product that our price comparison websites could use. Right? So just theoretical examples, but you begin to see you've got multiple events from multiple different domains feeding into one product. You've got events being used in multiple products, right? So the product really is a separate entity to the individual events that compose it, just in the same way that an API product is a different entity to the APIs that compose that product, right? So pretty similar idea, okay? All right. So how are we going to actually do this in practice? When we're looking at our event-driven architecture, how do we do this? Well, we're going to borrow, again, some ideas from the API, REST API world, right? So we can look at our event-driven system, and we've got a variety of different events flowing across it, like log data. We're probably not going to end up with an API product that's got log data in it, right? But, you know, OOMS events, they're probably high value. So we're going to start kind of categorizing things based on the business value, right? Now, log data, business essential, but it's not a high value business event that we want to expose. So we can kind of add another layer in where we can kind of look at some of our system events and kind of say, okay, so these are enterprise level events, whether that's because they need to go across the enterprise or because they're valuable at an enterprise level. And that's the point at which we can start, you know, once we've identified these enterprise level events, that's when we can start looking at bundling them up into these API product ideas, right? So once we've done that, wouldn't it be nice if we had a developer portal that we could create and publish these event APIs to, right? It shouldn't be rocket science, it's how we do REST APIs. So obviously, you know, as you kind of go up this diagram, the more value and the more exposure you want for these events. So our log data, well, we're probably going to want to, you know, that can be evolved pretty quickly because it's got fairly local scope. But then if we're going into, say, stock allocated events, we can immediately see we need to be more careful about them with regards to versioning and the effects of downstream changes. Okay, so how are we going to actually do this? So this is like my self-help course on how to create event API products. So another case of like EDA being less mature than REST APIs is that typically when you talk to organizations now, they don't actually have a good release cycle in regards to events, right? There doesn't tend to be a lot of governance around, have you fully documented this event? You know, is it fully signed off? Is there a manager for it? It's just because we've come from a kind of hacker playground, whether it's an investment bank or something like Netflix, right, where they've got their own way of doing things. There isn't a standard way of doing this. So what that means is that if we're going to do this, we're probably going to want to look into our runtime, which in the REST API world is obviously our API gateway. In the event world, it's our event broker. We probably want to look in there and find out what we've actually got. Okay, so we want to do a discovery phase and we want to bring those events in, see what we've got. Obviously, once we've done that, once we've got a single point at which we can see all of our events, all the events we've designed ourselves and all the events we've found that just happen to be in our runtime, right? We want to start cataloging them. We want to start annotating them with metadata, who owns this, what's it for, that kind of thing. Once we understand that, we've got some kind of catalog, that's when we can start curating them and bundling them together into these products, right? So that's kind of the 3 initial stages. Once we got there, hooray, release. People start using them, we go to the pub, right? Yeah, no, life doesn't work like that, does it? Because then we've got to manage them, right? We've got to release, we've got to have a proper release cycle. We've got to product manage them. We're probably going to want to evolve them as the individual events evolve, the architecture evolves, the customers evolve in what they want, right? So we need this full kind of cycle of management of these things. Okay, so how do we start? Well, warning product pitch. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we do it in Solace. We've taken the API, the REST API model, and basically done exactly the same thing. So our runtime is the event broker. We've got our own, and then we're building on top of that. We've built on top of that this event portal, which is very much like an API design and management portal, right? Now, the idea behind the event portal is that it is broker agnostic. We're not going to tie you into our ecosystem because that's not how we do things. At the moment, we can accept most of the Kafka flavors. We're going to be expanding this to accept other event brokers, things like Rabbit or WebSphere MQ, those kind of things. Okay, and the idea is you can design your event flows in there and you can also discover the existing event flows from your runtime, just like you would with an API portal. Right, and it will give you a nice event flow chart like that where you can see your event flows, whether that's what you've designed and are now pushing down to the broker or whether that's what you've already got in the runtime. Okay. So how do you go about discovering what's already in there? Well, we've got this discovery agent that will go and probe your runtime. That's going to send you a file that's going to list all your events. We had one customer. They had their Kafka cluster. They thought they had about 70 events. When they actually ran the discovery, they found they had 3,500, of which over 2,000 had not had any events on them in over a year. Right, so it can be quite interesting. Okay, we do some admin about associating events with particular parts of the broker, and then we can bring it into the event portal and start looking at the event flows. Right. Once we've done that, well, now we've got a catalog. Right. We know what events we've got flowing around our system. Lovely. And now we've got them in the catalog, we can start going into them and start annotating them with metadata. Who owns this event? What's the description of it? What does it do? When should I use it? That kind of thing. Once we've done that in the catalog, well, now we're in a position to say, do you know what? I want to bundle these set of events into my API products. Now I've got a catalog of API products, I can start annotating the metadata to the API product. So who owns this API product? Who's the product manager? Am I going to monetize this? Which particular environment is this product useful for? If I'm Royal Mail or whatever, and I want to come in and get these events, how do I do it? Okay, and the answer to that, by the way, has anybody heard of async API? A few people. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, async API is essentially open API, RAML, whatever, for the event-driven world, right? It's a open standard description of how you might go about consuming a given event or set of events. So our API products, we just ship you an async API spec, and that means that if somebody wants to consume this product, they just load that spec in, and away they go. So again, very much borrowing from the REST API world, right? So we can build our API products. We've got versioning in there. So we can see the versioning of the individual events. We've got versioning of the API product itself. All very nice. We can annotate metadata on it. As I said, owners, descriptions, that kind of thing. We've got an API so that you can extract that metadata and feed it into your marketplace, for instance, as an example. That's what we're doing with people like Gravity, Axway. Right? That's how we get from the event-driven world into their portals. And that's kind of basically it for how we produce API products. We've got this portal idea here where we can go in, curate our events, build them together into these products. I'm not going to lie, it's early days. It'd be really nice to see how this develops. All right. Just some quick points. I mentioned about this space being a little bit immature, so we're building up some integrations here. So we've got Event Portal, and we can hack it into some documentation tools. You know, if there's a change, we can emit a Slack message, tie it into CI/CD as well, that kind of thing. So gradually building this up. Last slide is a bit of a plug. If you're interested in this stuff, if you want to know more, a good place to start is our developer community, right? Sign up today and you get a free pair of socks or something. I don't know. It is actually true. You get a free pair of socks. But it's a good place to start, right? If you want to start playing with this, get a trial account, start using the API portal, the Event API products and Event Portal itself, right? Go to community. There's all the free downloads, all that kind of stuff there. Okay. Also, please come and talk to us about our stand, right? And I believe that's it. Yeah, it is. So just to summarize, right? Controversial claim for a vendor. You know, event-driven isn't that easy, especially for people who are used to REST APIs. But what we're doing at Solace is we're kind of borrowing a lot of the REST API ideas to build out a product set, to kind of build in that kind of front to back capability that you get with REST APIs, right? So a design environment, a cataloging environment, and this ability to be able to exchange information about events in this open standard way, right? So we can consume them just like you would a REST API and hopefully build that kind of level of usability into it. Okay, thanks very much. How are we doing for questions?
Yes, so if anyone has any question, please raise your hand. Yes.
Questions, excellent. I like questions.
Thanks. Very good presentation, and it's really interesting to see events kind of growing up, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing where I missed a little bit the connection. So you said you're kind of collecting the events that you see, build them up into these things that you then manage, and then somehow suddenly they were version managed, and I'm wondering how that is possible.
That's a good question. Yeah. Okay. I didn't make that clear. Okay, let's back up a bit. Right. In our catalog here, you can't see it in this bit, you know, it didn't fit on the screen. But essentially, if there's two approaches in, as I've said, right, you've got the design approach where you're designing your event-driven flow in the portal. And then you've got the discover approach where you probe the runtime and pull them in. When you're designing them, you've got the version management there at the very start. So you've got a version tag on these entities that you're creating. And you've got a choice. You can either use our version tagging, or you can go off to, as I said, in the integration section there, you can go off to GitHub or whatever you want to do. Obviously, when they're coming in from the discovery phase, we don't know. We don't know. So one of the admin steps is to go through and say, look, do you just want to blanket say these are all version 1 or version 0, or what do you want to do? Do you want to annotate them with version numbers? Like some people will have that in, say, a Kafka topic or something.
Just adding up. So I think one of the problems with events is, right, that one event type could be produced by 10 different producers, and they may have different opinions on how to version those. Right?
Yeah.
And then I think it gets a little tricky, which is like, this is just the nature of how they work. Right?
Yes. So that kind of comes down to the governance aspect, right? So there needs to be somebody who's there needs to be an owner of an event at the end of the day. Even though it may be produced by multiple systems, somebody's got to own it. And that's kind of my approach to these things, is that an event should have a single owner. That's not the same as the producer of that event, but you're going to have some control at the end of the day. I mean, that control might be that actually, yeah, it's all kind of the same event, but there's different schemas and things. So, you know, actually there's slightly different events and we should probably have them self-contained. Or we could have a kind of document and governance tool that says, no, if you're producing this event, here is exactly the specification behind that event. So one of the things that I haven't shown, for instance, in Event Portal is that there is a link to the schema for this event. And that can be, that's fully versioned as well. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I just have a follow-up question. So also thanks for the presentation. Is it possible to introspect the payload? So let's say I know that version 1 of this event has this JSON key and version 2 has this one. Would I be able to configure this and
so
this metadata?
We're very careful about RBAC. So if you think about when you're designing events, that's more of a kind of administrative kind of thing that you're doing. And that's different from the runtime of actually, say, a client coming in and connecting and consuming these events. So in the portal itself, it's more of a descriptive thing. We will not actually, in the portal, go in and introspect the events itself. But here's the good news, we give you tooling. So one of the things we can do is we'll export some async API. You can generate some Spring Cloud code as a scaffold, and you can go in and just create your clients very easily. But no, this is a design time tool, not a runtime tool, right?
No, I meant during discovery. So I just say,
right. So
take all these events and I have order created, and I see I have 5,000 order created events. And I know probably that there are 3 versions because I talked to the product owners, and I know that I can distinguish these versions. Could I configure this so that all these generated maps and graphs would reflect this? Right,
I see what you mean. So we've had a lot of conversations about exactly how we do this. So let's say we've got 2 different schemas on the same event, right? How do we understand that? I mean, you could feed into schema specifications and say, does this event, you know, which one does this correspond to? But if you look at something like a JSON schema, it's quite possible that an event that is intended to be one schema could actually be satisfied by both schemas. So that's a bit of an open subject at the moment. Currently, what we're doing is saying, now we're going to assume that a given event stream corresponds to one schema. And for that reason, we don't introspect. When we're doing discovery, we don't introspect to see, do you match that schema? We haven't done that yet. We could do it, but I don't think the argument about where the value is there is fully complete yet. If you've got opinions, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I know you said it's early days still, so the combining events and producing products out of them is in the UI. But is there a plan to have that be able to be done programmatically somehow or declaratively?
Oh no, we can already do that.
Yeah, all right.
So there's a full REST API that you can go into and generate your event API products programmatically. So a good example of that is naming conventions, right? So some people will put the product name in the events themselves, like in the documentation or maybe even in the topic string, and you can extract all of that automatically. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Great. Yeah. And then you showed a list of upcoming integrations. Any plans?
These are not quite upcoming. Hang on, where are they? These are not quite upcoming. They're currently available. They're just not kind of product ready yet. They're still in GitHub repos, right?
Is there any plans for anything for internal developer portals like Backstage?
We are doing work with Backstage at the moment. We're still in knowledge acquisition on that. Is exactly how it works. It seems that a lot of people are already doing some of the things we can do in Event Portal in Backstage. So watch this space, basically. If you come by our stand, one of my colleagues, Harry, is in the team that developed these, so he might be able to give you more information on where that is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Any online questions?
No.
No?
Not yet.
Okay.
People watching online, any questions?
Okay.
That'll
Well,
be all for today.
10 minutes back, an extra long break. Thanks very much. Hope you found that useful.